Wonderful. Welcome, everybody. It's Andrew Shapiro here, founder of Broadscale Group. Delighted to have a special session today on the politics of AI and power affordability. The topic really couldn't be more timely. As you all know, we've been spending a lot of time looking at the surge in power demand related to artificial intelligence and the growth of data centers, not just in the US, but globally. At our kickoff event last month, which we held with Morgan Stanley, we had a number of leading firms in the space, including Blue Owl and Crusoe and Emerald AI. And we talked a lot about the energy needs for data centers and how we get more clean energy. But we didn't spend as much time on the politics and the policy related to it. And it feels like those issues have become even more urgent. And so we were very fortunate to have two friends of our firm agree to speak with us today about those issues. Both of them lead organizations that are deeply and intricately involved in these issues. I'm going to let them start by talking about their work and how it's connected to this topic. But let me first introduce them. We have Heather Reams from CRESS, Citizens for Responsible Energy Solutions. Heather leads CRESS and has done so for a number of years and has joined us in the past to talk about public policy as it relates to energy. And she is very plugged in Washington, D.C. as one of the leading advocates on the conservative side of the political spectrum, advocating for responsible energy solutions, including clean energy. And Brandon Hurlbut, another longtime friend of ours who leads Boundary Stone Partners. Brandon was chief of staff at the U.S. Department of Energy some years ago, and Boundary Stone is a leading advisory firm in the space. And Brandon is also an investor affiliated with Overture, which is an early stage venture firm focused on energy transition, and also with NGP, which is a later stage investment firm. So welcome, everybody, and we're really delighted to have you here. Our format will be questions that I lead and facilitate for the first part of the hour, and then we'll really open it up to a broad discussion. But as always, we encourage you to jump in with questions. If you want clarifying answers from our speakers, I'm sure they won't mind. You can raise a virtual hand. You can even jump in and just say, hey, wait a minute, I didn't understand that. So feel free to do so. But with that, let me start with you, Heather.
Yeah.
Love to understand, we've talked to you, I think the last time we had you for a session was last summer when the reconciliation happened and we had all those issues in focus. And now it feels like AI and data centers have kind of swamped the field, so to speak. And we'll get into all sorts of things, including the White House announcement a couple weeks ago about the Ratepayer Protection Plan. But I'd love to start with, your view on what we've been discussing privately with you, which is there seems to be a backlash right now against data centers across different states, across the political spectrum, red and blue states. I was telling you guys earlier that I just saw a headline that was perfectly revealing from the Atlantic magazines that is inside the dirty dystopian world of AI data centers. I mean, we're really demonizing the folks who are trying to build AI data centers. And I also will, mention two factoids that I learned from Brandon in a talk he gave at Winterfest a week ago, which is there was recently a survey done that AI is less popular than ICE. That takes a lot. And also the fact that 230 environmental groups came together in a coalition to call on policy leaders for a moratorium on data centers. So, I mean, this is getting pretty significant. Heather, would love to understand your perspective from CRESS on this issue, and as you answer, tell people a little bit more about the work that CRESS is doing.
Yeah, great question, big open question, and I'll narrow it down this. And CRESS is looking to get as much energy on the grid as possible, but we want it clean. We want low emissions. So our goal is to focus on accelerating clean energy, not necessarily for a transition, but to ensure it's abundant, reliable, and affordable, but it's also clean. so that we're powering the future of America, but we're also, as a country, creating policies that help us lead the world in both reducing emissions, but providing energy and getting rid of energy poverty around the world. So we mostly work with Republicans and bringing Republicans to the table. We recognize that the climate is changing and that the federal government has a role in addressing climate. That's not necessarily always a popular place to be in the Republican parties, particularly right now, but that is where we sit. And I've been doing this job for about a decade. So data centers. So a lot of my work is in communications, and I got to tell you, I want to know who's running the PR game for the data centers, because it's not going very well, and it's getting complicated, as you're talking about. The fracture lines are politically creating places that you didn't necessarily expect. This isn't like a red or blue issue. It's not even an urban, suburban, rural issue. It's all of it. They're all mad, right? And if that data is correct, that AI is less popular than ICE, wowza. That even tells me it's gotten pretty bad. So, a couple things. One, people don't really know what AI means. It's like saying in the 90s, the internet and the World Wide Web. We say AI, like, and if I said it 3 years ago, I would have been thinking about, like, I don't know, maybe robots. I wasn't really sure what I was talking about. I think most people don't really think what AI will do for us. Right now, it's a giant sucking sound of their energy and their water, and it's driving up consumer bills, and for some reason inflation is out of hand and people are pissed. They want something to change. So let me just give a pro tip for anyone who is funding data centers or building them or on the PR side. Wrap them in the American flag and say, this is run on American homegrown clean energy, and this is how we win against China, because they need something. But it's really creating a place where we know, as a country, as policymakers know, we've got to win on AI. We've got to have the energy to do it. But the public opinion is just terrible. I think the president did a good job of saying, you know what, we're going to rein this in a little bit. We're going to protect the taxpayers, and we're going to do something. So the pledge that he had hyperscalers sign is symbolic. They were doing a lot of this anyway, but I think it was to kind of like soothe the American people that it's not going to get too much more out of hand. I'm not sure that it's working, but it is a step in the right direction.
Great. Thanks for that opening. Brandon, same question to you. How do you see, this backlash impacting development of new data centers and the critical AI functionality that we all want to see for positive reasons? Is it actually influencing projects yet?
Absolutely. I agree with everything that Heather said. In addition to some of the data that you provided, Andrew, 25 projects were canceled last year. There's 300 bills being proposed across the country in states around data centers. So this is a very active, policy issue. And in order for these data centers to operate, they need this social license. And there really is a crisis for them. I think everybody on this call, and as you noted, top policymakers understand that we're in sort of like the 1940s where we're in this race to build this technology, and whoever wins is going to dominate the world. So there's a huge national security imperative here. But for the American people, I know from my campaign life and political life, people that run these focus groups with voters, and they're telling me that in the last couple of months, this issue has ratcheted up enormously. And the things that these voters are saying without being prompted is so the deal is, you want to put this data center in my community. One, it's going to raise my power bills. Two, it's going to take my job, definitely my kid's job. And three, what you're going to give me in response for that is like a stipend. They're like, hell no, I am not signing up for that deal. And I think another part of this is that, to Heather's point, the messengers on this are really terrible, because what the American people see is these are the folks that made billions of dollars with technology that's melting my kid's brain. And now we're going to make them trillionaires to take their job away. So that's not like a deal that like people are excited about. And so there's a lot of work to do here.
So that's fascinating. Part of the equation then is you're saying maybe there's even built up animus that comes from, hey, whether it's Meta, Google, others, the social media impact on kids, the anxiety around work and the future of work, like all of that is perhaps feeding into, okay, now we hear, yes, there are some new names, OpenAI, Anthropic, and others, but basically these are the big tech hyperscalers, as we call them, but the general public just thinks of them as these big tech companies that, as you said, are run by multi-billionaires. And it kind of reminds me, to age myself, of that line in the movie Network, like, I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to put up with it anymore. There's a kind of visceral opposition to what's going on here. I mean, do we think it's fair, and in context, before we start talking about the policy response, are people overreacting? What do we think?
I mean, this is what we're talking. There is a lack of education, right? And I think people are running wild with what's going on, and it's just spiraling. Go on Nextdoor, go on Ring, go on some of the mommy blogs. I mean, people are blowing up about this, and it's like comment after comment after comment. And like I said, this is in all communities. So are they blowing up? Look, maybe, yes, no, but is anyone soothing it? I think is the other question. No. And so, I mean, this is getting to be a real, I'd say, PR crisis on our hands. And by the way, and a very expensive one. I mean, undoing a lot of this myths and what's going on a very local level, it's very expensive. So, and now you have policymakers. I mean, we're barreling toward the November elections, midterms, and we've got 36 governors up. We've got the entire House of Representatives. It's got a margin of like 1 right now between the Democrats and Republicans, a third of the Senate, not to mention all the state legislatures. And this is going to be the #1 issue. And no one's got an answer. That's the other piece. No one's like at this really good, like, well, you know what we're going to do? We're going to build on what the White House has done, and we're going to do this, and we're going to do that. It doesn't exist, right? It is for everybody. So then you've got mayhem. There's another movie, Cats and Dogs Living Together, and that is what's happening in America right now. So I'm not trying to be alarmist, but I mean, I'm sitting here in Washington. That's Pennsylvania Avenue. The Capitol is this way. White House is this way. It's a mess.
Yeah. Scott, did you want to jump in with a question?
I do. Thank you. So there's like this needle we're trying to thread here, which is there's some hard realities. And one is the power demands going forward. We're at an inflection point in the grid where demand is rising, and it hadn't for electricity for a long time. We got all this muddled stuff going on around policy, around energy, and sort of where it's coming from. So you have sort of the hard physics of the problem we're trying to solve. You have all of this noise you're talking about, which I agree is kind of getting louder and louder. How do we move? There are some really positive things about all of this, but they sort of don't rise to the level of the criticisms you're talking about. So if you were advising either policymakers or industry leaders at this moment in time, what is your counsel to them about, how to change this narrative and dialogue and actually change the hard realities of what we're doing?
So common sense, but Brandon, I'll let you
Well,
go first.
of course it is, but I'm not a politician, thank God. So
I would say, I mean, we're in an election year. The Democrats want to win. That is like the most important thing, right? And so on this issue, politically, not rationally or policy-wise, I don't think you can be populist enough. There is no like, you're too populist on this issue. The voters are scared. I mean, we're envious of like how good the Republicans are at communications. And one of the things that Trump has done so well is he has created a villain, and the villain is elites. And so if you look at like what Trump is saying, he's always playing that hit, and it works. The elites are against you. They're rigging the system against you. It's a great villain. And so if you're looking for a villain in this story to run against, Silicon Valley tech bros like Sam Altman, they're not popular. And so I think politically that's a winning strategy to run against that, especially as Heather said, like there's just this unknown, like people are like, wait a minute, like what is this going to take my job, my kid's job? Like they're very fearful. And so these moratoriums and stuff are going to be very politically popular. As far as like the way out, you can look at something like nuclear energy, which had a similar like social license issue. You know, I'm old enough to remember when like Democrats and environmentalists like did not like nuclear energy, and people were fearful of like nuclear waste and Chernobyl and 3 Mile Island and all this stuff. And now there's like a nuclear renaissance and fever in this country because there was a lot of work done to communicate the value and benefits for people in that. And it became on the Democratic side like a way to solve climate change. Like this is clean power. And so now nuclear has a better like social license to operate than it did 10 or 15 years ago. And so I think for the AI folks and data center folks, you're going to have to show, what does this mean for the community? What are the benefits? And so like Lancaster, Pennsylvania is a good example of that. They went in there and they're going to do work in the community that they see real benefits. Maybe the school needs a new like gymnasium, whatever it sort of takes. But people have to see, because it's not jobs really. It's not like the data centers are creating, you know, it's full of servers, not people. So, you know, we have to make the connection to how you're going to lower bills for people, and that can be done. There is a way that this build out, I think, as you all know, can lower people's bills, and what it means for like the grid, and you know, modernizing the grid and upgrading it could mean more clean energy and more renewable power. And that's sort of the way back with some of these Democrats who I do think there is a real fissure between the Democrats and Silicon Valley. Like when I left the Obama administration, many of my colleagues went to Meta and Google, and that was really celebrated. And now, like you talk to these Democrats on the Hill, and they see those guys, they think went down to Mar-a-Lago and are like part of this stuff that they're not excited about. So that's how I see it.
I'll give you a couple. I'll build on that. I think that's really, really smart, Brandon. I mean, I think three things. One, the benefits of AI. Brandon, you were talking about its jobs or its money to communities, but also what will AI do, like itself? Like I referenced the internet. I mean, no one gets on their phone or online and goes, I'm going to get on the internet now. We just do it. We don't talk about it. And we talk about AI like it's something that's something else. And we're never going to say we're going to start employing AI. We're not going to say that one day. We're just going to do it, right? And so think about what the implications of AI are in terms of improving our lives, similar to where internet has improved our lives and giving us access to information. But you know, whether you're curing cancer or pinpointing where a child is not learning, and so they, you know, are not going to learn how to do math very well, and then they'll become a political science major like me. It's terrible. So but we can really figure out where societal goods are going to come from this, and it's going to be even household by household. My son is going to learn math better because we can pinpoint where his gaps are in his learning because of COVID, right? When my kid was learning at home. I mean, that is actually something where I want, and then you're like, well, AI will do that. Yeah, you can put that data center over there. So I think that's one. Number two, business certainty. I think that you know, Republicans and Democrats know we've got massive business uncertainty right now. We've got tariffs. We're not passing permitting reform. You know, what Congress is willing to do. There's no real message that says we've got this under control. Democrats, Republicans, and that's what's up for grabs in November, but really helping to soothe the regulatory and legislative environment that this is a place where that investors can invest so that they can be part of the solution for helping and being part of this AI boom. So signals from the government, policy and regulatory from the government. And I think three, this is where we've got a real challenge, and this is a sweet spot for me. we've got to have all the above energy. We've got an energy growth like never before. It's been flat for so long, as was mentioned, and we have to figure out how we're going to do all the above. American homegrown energy is incredibly important, particularly now with the conflict overseas, and prices are going up. We need every electron, every molecule we can get. We just need it to be clean as well, and we can do that with innovation. So it's like, let's stop with this. You can't be on these federal lands. Offshore wind's bad. Solar can't be over here. Whether who likes nuclear or not, get out of that. We need American homegrown energy, and we need to be prioritizing the innovation agenda in our country. So I think with those three things, with different audiences, we can start to get our arms around this. It's just not happening.
Great points. Before we dig in deeper to kind of the policy proposals and responses, I want to ask you both, because you both talked about making this more tangible and personal to families and communities, and that comes from looking at, economics and opportunity. But what about the global geopolitical kind of race that we're in, right? I mean, you guys referred to it, I think, at the outset, that this is a priority for the country. Does that resonate with voters? Does that resonate with people, or are they like, I don't really care about DeepSeek in China. I just want, a stable job and a better life for my family and so forth. What do you think?
Go ahead, Heather.
Okay, I think the international arguments just overall don't pull particularly well with voters. Just so you know, I mean, I think people sitting on this call, like we're tuned in, we're plugged in, we follow this as part of our our work and maybe our personal interests as well. Most people really don't. So what China's doing over here, or what Europe does this and US should do that, never polls well. I'll tell you what I think would really get people concerned. Let's just say over in Iran and the Gulf of Hormuz, China helped Iran deploy some really crazy technology, something we've never seen. We think is, in the US, we think is 10 years out, 7 years out. But all of a sudden they've got it, and they had to do something tactically important that we wish we had. Well, then we care about China. Then we care about what they're doing, right? It's got to be something like big bang where you're like, ooh. But right now it's not tangible. They're doing this, we're not. They're building more, we're not. Well, they've got more people. They've got more money. They've got more this. The rules, regulations are easier. It's apples and oranges, and it doesn't really affect me. I do care about my job. But when it starts to be more visible, when China puts a balloon over our country and says, then you go, oh, wait, what's that? That's not okay. And China needs to send another balloon over our country, and maybe people get excited about, what China's doing. But right now, no, I don't think it's moving a whole lot. But thank God, by the way, our policymakers are thinking about this, right? And that's what they're elected to do. Democrats, Republicans, they're grappling with this. And it's very much top of mind for them, but not for the average American person.
Interesting. And Brandon,
I agree with that.
There's no Sputnik moment here that we had, like with the 50s in Russia, like the nation needs to come together, or is it just that no one's rallied the nation behind that?
I'm old enough to remember when my boss, Steve Chu, in 2011, I went with him and he gave the speech and he called it the Sputnik moment and sort of brought that term back about China and saying they're going all in on clean energy. They're going to win on batteries and EVs and solar, and we better get in the game. And no, not even our own administration listened to us. And so that didn't go very far. I think Heather's right. The economy is doing really well for the very top, and 7 companies are really driving it. Most people in this country are thinking about their grocery bills, their gasoline bills, their utility bills. And so making this connection to China is hard. But I do think that Americans want to be number one. And the minute that they see that, like, that's at risk, and that day could be coming, it could change depending on, what sort of plays out with China and how aggressive this gets. But, the right people do see that there is a real national. I mean, like, I think like Dario from Anthropic, he's kind of like an Oppenheimer. He's like, he kind of is acknowledging that this stuff, they don't totally know where it's going to go, and it's could be dangerous, but like, he's like, if somebody's going to build it, it better be us.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. All right, we're going to open it up to questions in a few minutes, but I want to start digging into sort of the policy drivers and mechanisms here. So as we've said, there's been this new conversation nationally about protecting ratepayers from, power prices spiking due to AI and new data centers. How is that translating into actual policy action at the state level with the complex patchwork of PUCs and ISOs and RTOs and even utility action? Where do you actually see real rubber hitting the road when it comes to those proposals before we even get to the White House summit a week or two ago?
I think one of the bright spots is thinking about the more efficient transmission lines. So rewiring or putting more higher capacity lines where existing lines are, or squeezing out more from the existing lines using AI and using other technology. It's an obvious place to start. It doesn't require much new permitting. So it can be done without an overhauling of our permitting reform that we're looking to do in Washington, ideally this year. And it's been getting support out of the Department of Energy. It's politically neutral, and so it's a safe place to start. So we're seeing that as I think a first place, like use what you've got, use it better, or rewire or improve upon what you've got. And let's start there. And some of the numbers look really good about increasing capacity by like 25%. I mean, that's a good place to start. But that's just it. It's a place to start. It's not a place to finish.
Brandon, what do you think? What are you seeing in states and various entities?
Yeah, I think there's going to be like a jurisdictional battle here between, you see the White House, they want to preempt this, and states are moving on this. And I do think for utilities, there is a risk. I talked about the villains before and the Silicon Valley bros, tech bros, like there's a risk that utilities can be put into that camp. And so my understanding on some of this interregional transmission is utilities don't really like that. And so in order to get some deals done, we have to figure that out. There's 9 PUC elections in November, and I think that this will be at the heart of those. We saw what happened in Georgia, where some of those PUC seats flipped last year. Democrats hadn't won like that in a long time, and affordability, utility bills, and I think data centers are lurking behind that. So I think it's going to be really active at the state level, and it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out, because Andrew, you talked about this very fractured system.
Yeah.
Can this fractured system, Byzantine system that was designed for a very different day, create the growth that we need, that we need to do fast?
Yeah,
I don't know.
I agree. Yeah, I agree, Brandon. I agree with you on the utilities and being between a rock and a hard place here about what they're going to do. There is concern that the president, who is a disruptor in terms of policy, I mean, he just ripped down the Jones Act for shipping for 30 days, and that was something we weren't expecting either. But would he do something so bold as to really take on utilities and investor-owned utilities and what they're doing? It's possible, but this is a big policy issue that's being debated in Washington. I mean, going over to the pledge, that was, he's like, these guys, these tech pros, these hyperscalers are they're going to pay for this energy, so you don't have to, ratepayers. But you're like, okay, what about transmission? Who's going to pay for that? And I can see Trump going like, well, they're going to pay for transmission too, and like, wait, and then utility is going to be like, what? That can't be. But there's going to be developers who are like, yes. So the verdict is out on this. And I mean, it is like your fingers like this trying to figure out what's going to happen day to day. And it was already challenged and stressed with the affordability, like pushing in on this discussion, but you put in a conflict in the Middle East and not getting the oil and gas around the world that we need, and boy does this, and gas prices start going up at the pump. They've been at $3, right? They start going towards 5. People really start getting wacky in the US about this stuff. Then you've got oh my gosh, Trump's like, I got to do something. We're barreling to November. What do you do, right? You do something kind of drastic, whether it's going to work or not. So I get your popcorn, friends. Get your popcorn.
Let's talk a little bit in more depth about this White House meeting and the Ratepayer Protection Plan that came out of it. I mean, first of all, how did he manage to pull in all these hyperscalers and get a commitment on what seems like pretty short notice? And is there anything real there? And some of the firms said, hey, we were already doing this. We were planning to cover these costs, so this is kind of symbolic. Do you see any real traction or change as a result of that event?
You know, the president, the office has incredible convening power. Most of the time when you invite people to the White House to meet, people accept that invitation, and Trump uses it very well. And I think it was a good, they're seeing the same polling, which is like there's a vulnerability on this issue for that. Because as he ran on, I'm going to lower your power bills, and power bills are going up. And everybody saw that inauguration where, the Silicon Valley guys had front row seats above the cabinet members. So, and people know, like, he's basically saying, we're not going to regulate you. We're going to let you do what you want. And so they got to be out. They got to figure that out. And so I thought it was, a good political event for him. There's obviously no enforcement mechanism in this. And I think that the hyperscalers, they've got ambitious clean energy goals, which they made before all this happened, so they got to manage that. But they need speed. And I think they're willing to make some trades there. And I'm seeing some interesting proposals. Andrew, we talked about this a little bit at Winterfest. Jane Flegel put out this thing. She's at the Searchlight Institute, called the American Grid Infrastructure Fund. And that's an idea that the hyperscalers could come together, pool their money, do some contract aggregation, commit to the demand, create like an insurance pool. Because, a lot of utilities, they're like, okay, if we commit to all this CapEx and then DeepSeek comes out with some magic chip, that's way more efficient, and then we have a bunch of stranded assets, like, that's not good for anybody. So the insurance pool could be like, you got to commit to this. And if you actually build it, we use it, you get the premium back, right? So it could solve for some of that stranded asset issue. So seeing some thoughtful proposals out there about how, the hyperscalers can sort of come together and, not pass these costs on, to the ratepayers, but also like, I've been a fan of distributed energy for a long time, and it's been slow, much slower than I would like. But maybe this is the liftoff moment, because, I think hyperscalers like, man, we need this fast. Like, we could just put a bunch of batteries out there, whether it's in homes or commercial and industrial companies, and that's going to solve a lot of problems for them, on the grid. And people might get backup gen in their house at like a rate that is much more affordable than in the past. So I think finding those ways where like 1 + 1 can equal 3, and I think they're out there. Like, they have money, they will spend it, they need speed. How do we deploy some of these clean energy technologies that will make for a better home for people and also solve some grid problems? I think that moment is here.
I completely agree, Brennan. I think this is something that there's a problem and innovation can solve it, and there's money to be made solving the problem, right? And so and boy, that's a recipe for capitalism in America, right? So that's where I think it gets really exciting. It's a dynamic place to be right now, thinking about the amount of money that's at stake. To solve a problem is pretty incredible. So I think hyperscalers were already doing a lot of this, as you said. They were doing co-location, so that they're building they're building their own energy, and they're putting the data centers right there next to it because they knew they couldn't get it. They couldn't deal with the congestion on the grid. They couldn't wait through FERC to get it together. That still exists right now. These islands, energy islands are existing. Distributed energy is being talked about. Every conference I've been at for the last year, well, half year, that's this year, 2026, distributed energy is coming up, and it was kind of quiet for a while, and now we're like, whoa, this is really something that's really sparking imagination. And unlike, or like, I see a lot of similarities in the 90s when I was a young girl in Washington, and the time when we talked about the internet, and there was a lot of .com and excitement, of course, but it wasn't as much on the infrastructure side. I mean, there was like some broadband and other things, but now we're like, we need to build big things. We need to reimagine in that way. So, combine that ingenuity and innovation of what we've been doing since the 90s with decent capital and solving problems. I mean, there are some hell of opportunities here, and this is what we try to bring into policymakers in Washington, and say, like, do you get this opportunity? People who have been retired for a while, who've got plenty of money, are like going, I got FOMO. I can't sit on the sidelines. I got to get back in this game. This is I got to be part of this. It has nothing to do with how much money I've got in my accounts. It has to do with being part of something that may be more incredible than the Industrial Revolution. I want in. And so, like, and then you have to go to the government, like, get out of the way. Like, create a regulatory environment and get out of the way and let this happen. And I think, I mean, how do we bring those messengers into Washington to say that, right? Credible messengers. And that's something that I've been working on for the last year, is bringing that in different ways, because the same old messengers are not working, or it's too piecemeal, or it's too political. We need to navigate this in a different way, so policymakers are like, oh, and maybe it doesn't have to be a big bang crisis moment. It's just this makes sense for America. That hasn't happened yet.
Really interesting. We need to find the right messengers too. I want to open it up to questions, so feel free to raise a virtual hand, or if you want to rather write your question in the chat, you can do that. Anyone want to jump in? Because I have a couple more questions if not. Okay. Let's talk about some of the specific ideas. One of the concepts that's been floating around is this idea of, like, bring your own generation or bring your own capacity. There are other proposals around cost shifting or focusing more broadly on grid reliability, flexibility, upgrading transmission, etc. Are there any of these that you think are particularly gaining traction in the key jurisdictions where data centers are being built?
I think nuclear is showing some interesting leg, I guess. I was really struck by the deal Microsoft had with Constellation and re-engaging 3 Mile Island. I mean, that closed, 1979, and the fear of nuclear has been there, out there. What we do with waste, what happens if there's a meltdown. Chernobyl didn't help. Fukushima didn't help. Right. And so now you're like, we got to open this old place back up because we need our energy so badly. And by the way, we're willing to spend 5 times the amount it costs because we really need that energy. I mean, that's what we're talking about. Like, this is when Brandon's talking about speed, think about that. It's not necessarily fast, but it is a guarantee. Those assets are sitting there waiting to be re-engaged. So I think, and this is in the PJM markets, which is one of the larger markets where a lot of the data centers are located. And the Constellation is all too happy to bring policymakers up there to talk about how they're doing it, why they're doing it. Microsoft talking about the need for massive amounts of energy, and this is going to bring them energy for a long time once that investment is up and running. So I think people are thinking long term. Companies are thinking long term. I think they're thinking short term. Brennan mentioned batteries and getting things moving now. I mentioned co-location. I mean, I think it's all on the table. in ways that are pretty incredible, despite the fact that supply chains for, let's say, a gas turbine has been, 4 or 5 years, and then those prices, I mean, getting ahead of the line, people are paying premiums to beat out so-and-so and say, I'll pay 5 times as much. So when you're talking about this kind of capital that seems to be able to be deployed by certain people, it does make you think, if you're a politician, I got to tell you, you got to get like, well, if you got that kind of money, you've got more money to add to this ratepayer thing and solve my problem. So, I mean, I'm gonna forecast more to come on who's paying, by the way. I don't think it's done. But I also think this is I think that there's long-term, midterm, and short-term strategies that hyperscalers and others are using. And those who are serving, getting data centers and providing energy to the grid, this is a hell of an opportunity because everything's on the table.
And before I go to you, Brandon, just a quick question, Heather. You talked about the all of the above strategy, which I think it might have even been George W. Bush who first kind of coined that phrase. This administration doesn't seem to love all of the above. They like some of the above, and particularly
anything but.
Yeah, anything but solar and wind. But could this be a change or a tipping point where they say, you know what, our kind of bias against renewables and distributed energy maybe didn't make sense because it was inconsistent with our desire to be dominant in AI?
I think there's some there. And I think where the president has been and the administration is different than where maybe most congressional Republicans are. I think Republicans got into a very comfortable all the above space because it makes sense. They have all the above in their districts. They're representative of it. They've got solar, they've got wind, they've got a hydrogen facility or a hub that's nearby, geothermal. I mean, all these pieces are exciting, and they're like this. The idea about what they used to say about climate denial. I'm not a scientist, I don't know. But they also are like, I'm not an engineer, I don't know. And so it's easy to be in an all of the above place and say like, yeah, I like it all. It's bringing jobs, it's lowering prices, it's making it reliable and affordable. What's to be against? So when the Trump administration, and by the way, during the first administration, it was an all the above administration. So this was a surprise to advocates like me who are going like, yeah, the Trump administration did, a lot of clean energy came online during the Trump administration. What's to think that's going to be different in round 2? Did not see this coming. So it has been disappointing to see like the picking of winners and losers when Republicans have been so pointing out to, Democrats do that, Republicans don't. Now, and then Republicans go, well, it's the best of the above. We have the best and we're going to use the best. And that's what America does. Like, nah, that's not quite right. So I do think there's some signs that we're seeing more opening. Projects are getting permitted. They've been delayed that are renewable energy projects. I'm going to leave offshore wind to the side. That's its own own ball of wax over there. So let's keep that over here. When you're thinking about siting solar, it's happening, right? Batteries are still getting funded. The tax credit is still there. The loan program office is still intact, although it's a different name and doing things slightly different. But it is like the role of the Department of Energy has a place in helping to stabilize and finance in some ways, get smart people running it. So I think the administration's like, yeah, I was told kind of on the sly that there was going to be some changes starting in 2026. I think we're starting to see some of it. Now, I hope it continues. I hope that American homegrown energy and reuse every electron really starts to permeate because we absolutely need it. And an unfortunate conflict in the Middle East may be a massive driver in that.
Interesting. Brandon, your thoughts on specific policy prescriptions that are working or could work?
Yeah, I just wanted to build on that point. The Republicans in these elections are massively vulnerable on this because if you're a Democrat running in November, you can say your bills have gone up and this is why. Trump raised your taxes by eliminating the clean energy tax credits. He canceled projects, which reduced supply. He imposed tariffs, which made your supply chain more expensive. And he invaded Iran. Like for voters, that's just a pretty easy, like, okay, like that's a problem, like, so I think I'm hopeful to Heather's point that they are moving on this because they're probably seeing this, that this is a big problem. We need this to be a bipartisan issue. We shouldn't be fighting over, adding more energy to the grid, regardless of, where it comes from. And so as far as like the policies, um, I just think this is more top of mind than ever. Like I guarantee you in DC, like outside of the states in the Northeast, like did any senator know what PJM was like 2 years ago? Probably not. Like there's a massive education campaign that needs to be done on like the grid, right? I mean, power bills are going up. It's actually not totally because of data centers right now yet. That day is coming, but I think people on this call know it's like poles and wires and some extreme weather events and like just, some of those, parts of the distribution grid. But we're going to have to explain to people what the difference is between the transmission grid and the distribution grid and these RSOs and ITOs and all of this. And to me, the fact that you have hyperscalers that are doing off grid for their data centers, which is very difficult, is evidence to me that there is a structural problem here. I mean, you think about what we did in this country in the past with the federal interstate highway system that like unlocked all sorts of economic growth, and they just like built highways across the country. Like the grid is the backbone of our economy. And you look at what China has done with their investments and they're doubling and tripling the size of our grid like every couple of years, and the amount of energy that they're unlocking. I mean, to me, that's people are going to really start to zone in on that. And that's going to be more attention from DC than ever because we have to, because it's going to really put us at a disadvantage to grow when other countries are building transmission lines, are building out their grid, and we're way behind on all that.
I'll flag also, Andrew, that this has come up in some of my conversations, and I'm not sure if this is like really hot for this group, but I talked about one of the missions of Cross is to make sure we're accelerating clean energy, but we're keeping emissions low. And there, with all this growth, there's a lot of questions about, well, where's climate in all this? Do we care anymore? Right. And can we solve that too? Can we walk and chew gum and juggle? Really, is what it feels like when you're going to have to address climate. Oh yeah, and climate was, I'd say, easier, and I say that in just kind of tongue in cheek when I say easy because it's never been easy, but it was easier when the demand was flat. We didn't have these challenges that we're also trying to thread the needle on here. So, and we have massive growth, and we're creating scarcity, and we'll burn anything we can to keep the lights on, and we want to reduce emissions. Good luck, right? And so I think there's also that piece of the innovation and technology that may not be for this administration, for this Congress, but you get it on the other side of midterms, and you've got Democrats that are, I predict, are at least going to take the House, are going to say, we want to bring it back to emissions as well. What are you doing for bringing down emissions? I think nuclear has a excellent pathway here. It's just going to take a while. Right? Wind and solar are ready to go with batteries, ready to go. They're the quickest and it's deployable. Maybe the administration's doing that, but there's going to have to be another layer to this, and that is how are we keeping emissions low, but we're burning everything right now. So this is still another area that's not getting the hearings, it's not getting the headlines, but it is top of mind for a lot of advocates like me.
So glad you added that. And look, we've been talking a lot about, obviously, gas has been a huge beneficiary of these data center booms. And question is how to offset those emissions, whether it's carbon capture, et cetera. We're going to have to end in about 5 minutes because Brandon has an important meeting on the Hill. So I want to, again, if anyone has questions, feel free to raise a virtual hand. I've got another one for both of you, which is, what are the potential negative fallout scenarios here? I mean, could the hyperscalers say, you know what, this crazy patchwork in the US is just too much, we're going to start building data centers elsewhere? Or, as we had an amazing session with Adam Jonas from Morgan Stanley a month ago, he was talking to us about Elon's plans for data centers in space. Is that a real potential option that people just say, look, this is just too difficult, and we're gonna, not try to work the local politics and advantage local communities. We're gonna pick up and move elsewhere, maybe even off the planet.
I think it's incredibly exciting, by the way. I've been following a data center in space for about a year. There's it wasn't an Elon Musk, but there was a guy who left SpaceX to do some of this too. And makes a lot of sense. I met an inventor engineer the other day who's building in the Gulf of America data centers and taking the stranded natural gas and sucking it into the data center so it's floating in the Gulf of America. I mean, is it viable? Look, I'm not an engineer. I don't know, but I can tell you that this innovation of trying to solve the problem is pretty exciting. But where I get nervous is when you start building, let's say, both, in border countries, whether that's in Africa for Europe, and that's in Mexico or Central America for the U.S. You're stripping the environmental laws aren't as strong, so you can burn more there to have the data centers to go, and it's crossing into international. And some of these pieces can be exploited. I think those are some concerns I'm watching for, because particularly from a carbon standpoint and emission standpoint, but also just taking your marbles and going home and investing in other places where the regulatory environment is more conducive, to be able to build. And that, if I see that, okay, if I see space, I'm like, that's cool. If I see you going to another country and doing this in a way that's going to take away from the US's ability to lead, I mean, policymakers have really got to get nervous about that. I don't see a ton of evidence of that right now, but if things don't change in terms of business certainty, who can blame them?
Great, Heather. Thank you so much. Brandon, last remarks from you.
Yeah, I would say they have to build. They're in an existential race, and so if they can't do it here, or they have to violate some clean energy goal, they're going to do that. And so you had the Middle East was trying to build this very favorable area to build, and so I think this war has impacted that, because Amazon had a couple data centers that were bombed. So now you're like, wait, that option may not be such an attractive option anymore. So I understand, like with latency issues, there is some constraints. They want to build here. They will do everything they can to build here. We should make that attractive to them. But if they can't get what they need here, they will look elsewhere, even though that's getting more difficult with what's happening in the Middle East right now. As far as space goes, I talked to a top engineer about this, and he said, yeah, it's theoretically feasible. And he noted that Elon, when it comes to first principles, like on the physics of something, he's never been wrong.
Exactly. He's a pretty significant foundational physicist, and so
yeah, like whether you believe the timeline or any of that stuff, who knows? But like on the physics of, can you do this?
Yes.
First principles.
Yes.
Like if he says you can, he's done the homework and he's never been wrong on that stuff.
Yeah. Well, terrific conversation. Thank you so much, Heather and Brandon, and to our network members. Certainly, if you want to follow up with either of our speakers today to learn more about how your companies can be involved in, changing the narrative and getting a more productive dialogue around data centers. Many of you have deep, I would say, interests in this space for sure. And so we're happy to connect you. And again, big thanks to Brandon and Heather for a very robust conversation. Appreciate it.
Thank you, guys.
Appreciate you having us. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.